when he gave me that advice, at first I was kind of like, really, is that it? But okay, like I'll do whatever you say, because you're obviously successful, as we talk about, success leaves clues, and I'm willing to start there. And I did exactly what he said. I read that book.
Yeah, per your request, I actually started going through the Rocket Fuel book myself, and it's very clear within the first few chapters where I fit in and some of the weaknesses that we have. And I was kind of aware of it, but when you read a whole book about it, it really twists the knife and kind of motivates you to do something about it, right, and to make a change. So that Rocket Fuel book, I've got some big hopes for it based on what I read so far. It seems really good. I already know I like the author was really good from the previous book, Traction. So yeah, we can talk a little bit about that book. Are you finished with Rocket Fuel, Gabe?
I am. Yeah.
I want to give us a rundown of what it is and why it's important?
Yeah, absolutely. So a quick little backstory, because I love stories. When I started my first business, I met with a mentor of mine. I took him out to El Pollo Loco because that's all I could afford at the time. I bought him a couple of BRCs, and I was like, hey, I want to start this photography business. And he was well established in the photo community at that time. And I really looked up to the guy. He had a pretty big following, was shooting these kind of like high-end events, had a really successful, and that was just one of his businesses. So I looked at him as the kind of guy, I'm like, hey, this is someone I would take advice from, and sat him down over a couple of burritos. And I was like, okay, like, what do I do to start my photography business? Because I, was kind of a hobbyist photographer at the time. And was like, hey, how do I need to start an LLC? How do I set up my books? How do I start marketing? Like, how do I get my first jobs? All this stuff, right? And he gave me two pieces of advice. He said, go take 100,000 photos this year, like ASAP, and read this book. And he handed me this book called The E-Myth Revisited, which a lot of this stuff actually in Traction, Gino Wickman specifically, like calls out Michael Gerber, and the author of that book is a huge inspiration. And you can see a lot of E-Myth kind of infused into that book. And when he gave me that advice, at first I was kind of like, really, is that it? But okay, like I'll do whatever you say, because you're obviously successful, as we talk about, success leaves clues, and I'm willing to start there. And I did exactly what he said. I read that book. I took as many photos as I could. I actually ended up going through a coaching program with that company, and the very next year was the first year I'd ever hit six figures in my life. Our photo business was kind of like off into the races. So I've always been passionate about systems and learning how other entrepreneurs operate in their businesses, and specifically, especially when you can look at other industries and models that they might have and apply it to your own. And so when Rocket Fuel came across my path, it actually came across my path because you had recommended Traction. And then right after Vegas, I was on a guy's trip with some other business owners and an entrepreneur friend of mine who owns like a wedding album company, actually. So they print albums for photographers. I was telling him like, hey, yeah, I just picked up this book, Traction. I'm going to dig into it. He's like, hey, you should read Rocket Fuel first, because it sets up this kind of they call it the EOS, your entrepreneurial operating system. So if you look at, the way what E-Myth talks about, the way most people start a business, and honestly, it's the way most of us started. And maybe some of you, especially if like this is your first business, it's probably how you started it, where like you're working for someone else, you're good at the work that you do. And then you get this idea that like, hey, like I could do this better than my boss, or I could make more money if I did it instead. And people kind of like stumble into entrepreneurship. And Michael Gerber like quickly unpacks like how detrimental that can be, because the doing of the thing inside the business, like even if you look at our business in lead generation, the ability to generate a lead is super important. But that's like just one piece, very core piece to what we do. But like, if you can't go get a business owner to like pay you for those leads, and you can't maintain good communication or do that at scale, which I know you've been able to do in your agency, where now you can replicate that multiple times over with, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds and hundreds of lead gen sites, like you're not going to be able to grow your business. And so in this book, Rocket Fuel, Gino Wickman talks about the entrepreneurial operating system, and very specifically about how most organizations will have two kinds of people. They'll have this like visionary leader who's usually the like super creative, like forward thinking, a mile a minute. I mean, like that's in terms of like, you know, the guy's got so many ideas nonstop. And then you have the integrator, which the integrator is really the person who would go and take those ideas and make them actually happen, like on like runway, like, okay, hey, you got this great idea. Like, what's the very next thing we have to do to implement? And so Rocket Fuel talks about that, this idea of like the friction that is generated between those two different kind of types of personalities. And it gives you a ton of different systems that you can infuse into your business to like kind of mark out a vision and then actually practically go achieve it through your team and people and systems.